Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into an absolute masterclass on empathy, humility, and human connection. We're going to be exploring the lives of the Salaf. These are the pioneering early generations of Islamic leaders. Now, these were people who possessed unimaginably vast authority. But here's the thing, they didn't view their immense power as some kind of VIP privilege. No, they saw it as a terrifying responsibility. And their approach to the vulnerable in society, it completely redefines what it means to actually be a great leader. I am so pumped to guide you through this because the stories we're about to uncover, they're not just dusty historical footnotes. They are incredibly powerful, highly relevant blueprints for compassionate leadership today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just take a second and try to picture a modern ruler, a president, maybe a billionaire CEO, physically cooking for the poor in the dead of night. And I don't mean organizing a PR charity drive or cutting a ribbon at a soup kitchen with cameras flashing. I mean literally sneaking out into the freezing cold, blowing on a fire, and cooking a meal with their own bare hands. It sounds completely impossible to our modern ears, doesn't it? But that perfectly captures the incredible paradox we're looking at today. On paper, their title is Caliph of the Muslims, meaning they are ruling over a sprawling empire that seriously rivaled Rome and Persia. But in reality, the reality is them on their knees blowing on a fire just to cook for a few orphans. This massive, jarring contrast between their unimaginable worldly status and this gritty, hidden, physical humility, that's the core of what made these leaders so extraordinary. Because to them, having true power meant offering the ultimate service.
Which brings us to our first main theme, leaders terrified by a poor person's moan. See, the cries of the vulnerable didn't just make these leaders feel sympathetic. It struck absolute, freezing terror into their hearts. They believed with every fiber of their being that they were going to be held personally accountable by God for every single hungry stomach in their entire empire. Picture this scenario for a second. It's a freezing, pitch-black night in the desert. Umar bin al-Khattab, the second caliph, stumbles upon a mother surrounded by her crying, starving children. She'd actually put a pot of plain water on the fire, just to trick the kids into thinking food was coming so they'd finally fall asleep. Heartbreaking, right? Now, Umar doesn't just dispatch a servant to drop off some rations. No, he physically runs to the state treasury, hauls a massive, heavy sack of flour and fat onto his own back, and treks all the way back to that desolate spot. He drops to his knees, personally blows on the fire until smoke fills his beard, cooks the food himself, serves those children, and refuses to leave until he literally sees them laughing and falling asleep.
So what's driving this level of extreme action? Well, back at the treasury, Umar's servant, Aslam, actually begged to carry those heavy sacks for him. And Umar, he turns to him with this look of just absolute dread and says, "Will you carry my burden on the day of judgment?" He wasn't being poetic or dramatic. He deeply, viscerally felt the crushing weight of his leadership. To him, if one child went hungry, that was his personal failure, his sin, his terrifying burden to bear.
And that leads perfectly into our second section, hidden charity and serving the needy.
Now, a massive theme you'll notice in these historical accounts is the idea of secret service. These leaders weren't just writing checks. They were giving their hidden time and breaking their backs with physical labor, specifically when nobody was around to applaud them. Get this timeline. It's midnight. A prominent companion named Talha spots Caliph Umar sneaking out completely alone. Deep into the night, Talha secretly trails him and watches Umar slip into these ruined, rundown houses. Talha is, understandably, totally bewildered. So the next morning, he goes back to investigate. He walks into one of the houses and is shocked to find an elderly, blind, and paralyzed woman. When he asks her about the guy who visits at night, she says she has no idea what his name is, just that this stranger comes regularly to bring her food, clean her house, and sweep away the dirt. Think about that. The supreme ruler of a massive expanding global empire was secretly doing a blind woman's household chores. Wild.
And it wasn't just Umar doing this kind of stuff. Take Imam Zubayd al-Yami. While everyone else was huddled up in their warm beds during fierce winter storms, Zubayd would literally light a torch and brave the freezing midnight winds. He'd walk through the neighborhoods, knocking on the doors of isolated elderly women, just asking if their roofs were leaking so he could patch them up or if they needed fire for warmth. Then, the very next morning, he'd go back out and do their grocery shopping at the market. He essentially acted like a dutiful son to people who had absolutely no one else. He completely transformed the concept of a state social safety net into this web of profound, deeply personal mercy.
Now, what's really interesting about this next story is how this radical empathy goes even further. We're talking about Minister Abu Shuja's winter vow. On a freezing cold night, he gets a letter about 4 orphans shivering somewhere in the city. His immediate reaction? He strips off his own warm winter clothes. He just stands there in his freezing room, shivering violently, and swears a solemn oath that he will not warm himself. He literally only puts his clothes back on when his servant finally returns and confirms that those specific orphans are fully clothed and fed. He completely refused to experience the comfort of warmth while others under his watch were suffering from the cold. Talk about physical empathy.
Okay, moving right along to section 3, humility and breaking class barriers.
So these historical figures didn't just help the poor from a safe, sanitized distance. They actively, aggressively dismantled social hierarchies and class divides in their everyday lives. To them, true status had zero to do with wealth or expensive clothes. We see this radical inclusion everywhere. For instance, Salman al-Farisi, who was a highly respected governor, would actively seek out people afflicted with leprosy. Now, remember, these were outcasts that society completely shunned out of fear and disgust. But Salman would bring them to his own dining table, eating right alongside them from the exact same plate just to completely erase their feelings of rejection. And then there's Abdullah bin Masud, a towering scholarly figure. He was once holding a gathering surrounded by all these wealthy elites. A poor blind man stumbles into the room, and what does bin Masud do? He pushes the wealthy man out of the way, pulls the blind man close, and seats him right next to himself. He was proving that proximity to the vulnerable was the ultimate VIP status.
All right, this next story is honestly one of my favorites. It's just incredible. So the great scholar Sa'id bin al-Musayyab had a huge, influential following. When he found out that a destitute student of his had just lost his wife, Sa'id, on that exact same day, bypassed all these wealthy, powerful suitors who had been literally begging to marry his daughter. Instead, he marries her to this penniless student for just 3 dirhams. 3! But it doesn't stop there. Knowing the guy couldn't afford any sort of wedding, Sa'id personally walks his daughter to the student's tiny, dark room that very same night. And then, a month later, just to make sure the young man didn't feel humiliated by his poverty in front of his new wife, Sa'id secretly sends him a massive fortune of 20,000 dirhams to preserve his dignity.
The student was completely stunned, right? He stammered that Syed should have just summoned him, rather than walking all the way out there in the dark. But Syed's response is just brilliant. He said, "No. You are more deserving to become to." I mean, wow. That powerful quote completely flips the traditional understanding of status on its head. It proves that in their framework of humility, the powerful go out to the vulnerable. The strong cater to the weak, not the other way around.
And look at how they handled the wealth they actually did have. Take Bakr bin Abdullah. He owned this incredibly expensive, exquisite robe worth 4,000 dirhams, a real luxury item. But instead of wearing it to show off to princes or rich merchants, he deliberately saved his absolute best, most expensive clothing solely for when he visited the poor. Why? Simply because he wanted to honor them. He dressed to the nines specifically to make destitute people feel respected, valued, and worthy of his very best appearance. Just contrast that for a second with how wealth is flaunted today. It's a completely different universe.
Which brings us to section 4, the jurisprudence of priorities in humanitarian work. You see, this deep, ingrained empathy naturally shaped exactly how they governed. These leaders developed a really strict, unwavering moral calculus for where resources should go. Take this mind-blowing decision by Caliph Amr bin Abdulaziz. So the caretakers of the Kaaba in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, requested funds to drape it in this expensive, luxurious new covering, which was the standard tradition. Amr writes back and flat-out refuses. He says, "I saw fit to place that in hungry stomachs, for they are more deserving of it than the house." Think about the magnitude of that. He prioritized the immediate biological needs of hungry human beings over decorating a sacred monument. It is the ultimate masterclass in getting your priorities straight. And they applied this exact same logic to their own bodies too, usually being pretty blunt about it. Like when Dawood Altai's servant prepared this rare, rich, super delicious meal for him instead of his usual dry bread, Dawood just tells her, "Take it down the street to the orphans." When the servant protests, saying, "Come on, you deserve a good meal," his logic is just flawless. He tells her, "If I eat it, it ends up in the toilet. If they eat it, it is stored securely with God." Boom. He viewed charity not as giving something away and losing it, but as depositing it into the most secure eternal bank account possible. Because they had this mindset, they literally revered the people they were helping. Check this out. Before handing a coin to a beggar, Ali bin al-Hussein would physically kiss the charity. He wasn't just tossing it from a distance out of some arrogant pity. He kissed it because he firmly believed that charity falls into the hands of God before it ever touches the hand of the poor person. The giver actually felt honored by the receiver. It totally flips the traditional power dynamic of charity upside down. All right, bringing it all home with Section 5, Leadership Lessons for Our Time.
We've just looked at some intense historical masterclasses in empathy, but how does all of this translate to modern leadership? I want you to pause and really ask yourself, what does this mean for today's leaders in corporate boardrooms, in politics, in our local communities? We live in a world where power is almost always used to insulate yourself from discomfort, right? To build higher walls, to hoard personal wealth. These extreme examples from the Salaf completely challenge our modern definitions of what success and power actually look like.
So the crucial point here, the real takeaways you can apply are these. First, view power as a terrifying accountability. If you are the one in charge, you are responsible for the absolute lowest person on the ladder. Second, practice hidden, unrecorded service. Do things for people that will literally never end up on your LinkedIn or your Instagram. Third, actively break down class barriers in your daily life and who you hang out with. And finally, rigorously prioritize the most vulnerable in your decision-making. True greatness isn't flashy. It's rooted in radical, hidden empathy. And honestly, there is a massive psychological benefit to living this way. The scholar Ibn Rajab summed it up beautifully. He noted that loving the poor isn't just some fleeting, feel-good emotion. It actively removes the harshness of pride from the human heart and replaces it with true humility. Why? Because serving someone who can offer you absolutely nothing in return, no networking, no favors, no cash, is the ultimate guaranteed cure for human arrogance. Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to end our explainer today. I want you to think about this. Who are the vulnerable people in your sphere of influence? And more importantly, how are you secretly serving them? Real leadership isn't about how many people serve you. It's about how many people you serve when absolutely nobody is watching. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible source material today. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I will see you next time.